Hi, Bill. How are you doing today?
Hey, Robin, it's a great day today. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am fantastic. Last week of quarter, people are excited, numbers being
Yes.
closed, everyone's happy. And Cato has recently secured another $238 million
Isn't
of
that
investment, putting us
wow?
at $3.1 billion valuation. Not too
That's incredible.
shabby for the only true SASE company, but
I would say so.
uh,
Absolutely.
I'm not here to brag. Business is often a gamble, and gambling, you have winners and losers.
You do.
And on the topic of gambling, I know that MGM have recently been in the news. What's happened, Bill?
Boy, so they certainly have been in the news, not only MGM Resorts, but a little bit of associated news with Caesars Entertainment. Certainly seems like Las Vegas is under the gun, but you're absolutely right, Robin. MGM Resorts went off the air essentially for about 10 days while they attempted to mitigate a cyber attack. And as news has continued to come to light, we find out that they may have been the victims of the same that managed to extort quite a bit of money from Caesars Entertainment. I think the last number I saw was around 15 million US dollars, Robin. So looks like all of a sudden Vegas is under attack. And listen, we would love to say it's because of the BlackCat conference or DEF CON, right? But we have a threat actor who is claiming responsibility, and of course, law enforcement is engaged. But the threat actor, if folks haven't heard about it, is someone claiming the name Scattered Spider. Have you heard of Scattered Spider, Robin?
Oh, I've heard a little about Scattered Spider, but for those who are initiated, who are they?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We don't know exactly who they are. Now, there have been some who have tried to analyze not only their methods of attack, but also some of the artifacts that come from those attacks. And they've tried to break them down into age groups. I saw somewhere that they thought it was a group of youths between 15 and 21 years old. Again, a lot of speculation going on. Certainly, speculation in terms of where they're from, where the attacks may be originating. But they do have a pretty specific fingerprint on the way that they operate. So I thought maybe what we could do today, Robin, is talk about how Scattered Spider works, who are some of their associates, or maybe more to the point, of whom are they associates, and how do they actually carry out their attacks, and maybe even dig. I don't know. You want to dig a little deeper today, Robin? Maybe we actually get into some questions of the MITRE attack footprint, and maybe we can even talk a little bit about how this could happen to an organization like MGM Resorts that has so much money. How did they manage to breach? What do you think? Does that make sense
That
today?
sounds great. I'll get my hard hat and harness, and we'll start spelunking. Let's go deep. Let's go deep. So
I
I
love it.
know, I know a lot of the Vegas resorts. They've extorted me for many dollars over the years with the, as you mentioned, Black Hat, DEF CON,
Right.
regional events. So yeah, let's go deep. So
Okay.
where should we start?
Yeah, we have to understand, Robin, that Las Vegas doesn't run the way that it does because of all the winners that they create, right? So we have to understand. Listen, Scattered Spider, very interesting. They're not new on the scene. We've been aware of them for a couple years, and there are various designations of their name, but obviously with the recent news, Scattered Spider is kind of the one that seems to be sticking broadly. Let's talk about how they work. Scattered Spider knows what so many of us already know when it comes to vulnerabilities, and that is that the end user is probably the most vulnerable part of what they seek to exploit. So they tend to go for the endpoint. Uh, the thing here is that we are starting with social engineering attacks. Ugh, here we go again, right? So how are they specifically doing it? Well, they are using, mechanisms like Telegram. So getting on Telegram, potentially impersonating folks, but they're also doing some smishing. Are you familiar with smishing, Robin? What the heck is smishing?
Well, smishing, vishing, and phishing are all a cacophony of somebody trying to extract or extort your data.
That's right.
Effectively, different paths to socially engineer.
That's
So
right.
what have they been doing in this world of smishing?
Yeah, so in smishing, they are attempting to redirect users. So what they do is they impersonate an IT department, for example, and they may send a message over text. For those who don't know what SMS is, I think we all use it, but we may not know it.
I'm
So they
sorry.
will send a text. I'm sorry.
Text,
Yeah,
plain text, CSV files to each other. Yeah.
yeah.
No,
I think we're going to have to get to that at some point,
come
Robin.
on, Bill. Most of the millennial and Gen Zs out there have never sent a text in their life. It's all
Oh,
through Telegram, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger,
that's
TikTok
right.
direct messages, and 35,000 other types of e-transport.
Boy, I tell you, we could have a discussion all in just in that particular vein. But yeah, the truth of the matter is, a lot of folks still use SMS, right? It's part and parcel of their daily function, and so they may, for example, be phished via SMS to go to what appears to be a corporate site. Hey, this is IT calling. There's some sort of an issue, right? That the impersonation begins. This is IT. We need you to go here, and we need you to log in because there may be a potential compromise. And of course, they have a site that looks just like a corporate site. There's your fish, right? Then they get a hold of credentials. The other thing that they're doing, and this is not unusual either, we're starting to see this more and more, is what's referred to as a SIM swap. SIM swaps are fun, right? So what do I do with a SIM swap? Well, if I'm a threat actor, what I would do is I would go and impersonate you. And I would basically say, hi, my name is Robin Johns. You can tell from my stunning good looks. I've had a problem. I know. I've had an issue with this phone. Can I please get a SIM card for my replacement phone? And if the carrier or the person at the carrier or even one of the third party providers for some of these carriers, you got to think about that, Robin. They will literally change your SIM over. And what good does that do? Well, now I potentially have access to two-factor authentication. There's an awful lot of people, Robin, for doing logins and so forth that use SMS for two-factor authentication. And your Uncle Bill wants to recommend something. Don't do that. That's a really, really dangerous way to do two-factor authentication, right? First of all, SMS is not encrypted. It's just not. But even if it were encrypted, if I can swap SIMs, now I have the ability to intercept that traffic for two-factor authentication. So between having your credentials and your second factor, I've got you. The other one that they will use, if you're not using SMS, if you're one of those smart folks who uses, say, an Okta or the like, they will execute an attack that's known as MFA fatigue. Help our listeners, Robin. What's MFA fatigue?
I'm going to keep spamming you until you click that accept button. Please accept, please accept, please accept. Just like my kids when they want some candy. Please, can I, please, can I, please? And eventually, you just get worn down so much like a rock in a stream, you just give way.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly it, Robin. So the lesson here is, if you use another multi-factor authentication solution, and there's many of them out in the market space, if you start getting spammed for to verify that it's you, don't get tired of it and simply click accept. I know that's the temptation when your phone is buzz, 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 buzz. Is this you? Is this you? Don't do that. That should be cause right away to contact your IT department, because that means somebody has gotten your credentials or is attempting to change your credentials potentially. And it's trying to verify that it's you by hitting that second factor, right? Something you have. We always talk about multi-factor authentication. Something you know, something you have, something you are. And there's a couple others, right? Somewhere you are, something you do. But don't hit accept. If it starts going off and you yourself know that you're not trying to change something or get in somewhere, call somebody. Don't simply hit accept. But this is what Scattered Spider will do, is they'll do that multi-factor authentication fatigue, hoping that at some point you're going to hit yes, and then they've got you, right? Then they're in. So that's kind of the initial access portion, and that is a specialty of Scattered Spider, right? They're just very good at it. They use those social engineering techniques. They'll try to phish you, they'll impersonate, they will try to do MFA fatigue and essentially get in. Now, once they're in, they have to start establishing certain priorities in order to get into the environment. Now, most organizations and even many private individuals will run some sort of endpoint protection. So call it anti-malware, call it EDR, endpoint detection and responses, any number of abbreviations. So I promised we were going to go a little deep here. We're going to have to get to that point now. So there's really kind of two items that Scattered Spider likes to use in order to try to kill that detection software, to try to kill that anti-malware. The first thing that they'll use is something called Portry, Poortry. This is actually a malicious driver. And the whole point behind this malicious driver is to give it enough privileges that it can kill any of that anti-malware, right, that may happen to be running. And it's really interesting the way that they get this in there. It actually is a supply chain compromised driver, right? So the driver is malicious in that it kills endpoint protection. But the reason that it gets through, particularly on the Microsoft Windows platform, is that it is a signed driver. So it's signed by the Microsoft Windows hardware compatibility authenticode signature, blah, 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 blah. Right? So the point is the supply chain has been compromised. Is this new, Robin? Have we ever seen this supply chain compromise thing before?
Many times. Just go back and listen to our back catalog of how you can easily be breached. Because once you get that supply chain compromise, you're effectively taking a trusted party, a trusted advisor with all the right labels and wrappings and everything looks great. But what you're being sold is a duplicate. You might think you're buying that Gucci handbag and you open it up and everything looks Gucci, but the label's slightly askew. You've actually been sold a replica, a fake. But it's not just about making money and selling replicas. Once your supply chain has been compromised, you open the door to so many more vulnerabilities.
That's right.
With this issue, if it's a compromised driver, shouldn't anti-malware tamper protection really kick in, or does it go one level deeper?
Well, it does go that one level deeper, because keep in mind that a driver gets kernel level access. And that's dangerous because kernel level access is privileged access. So it can even subvert that. It's funny, Robin, you're absolutely right about supply chain compromise. Probably one of the biggest ones in recent memory is the SolarWinds compromise. That was a supply chain compromise. And when you think supply chain compromise, what you're thinking about is trusting the supply chain. But the supply chain gets disrupted by a threat actor. You just continue to let it in. It's the same thing that we're talking about with Portry. We've even seen examples of Portry that are literally signed by NVIDIA certificates. So if you're not familiar, right, NVIDIA is massive in terms of graphics cards and even used in some high performance computer clusters and so forth. So it sort of subverts that in the fact that it is signed, it's trusted, because you are automatically trusting it. Okay, it goes ahead and lets it in. Now, by itself, it's a little bit difficult to kind of get that in. So there's another piece to the puzzle called StoneStop. StoneStop it's a loader, it's an orchestrator. So that's what actually loads the Portry, malicious driver and gets it into that level where all of a sudden it has privileged access. There's even another one, and not everybody's talking about this, and this is going to lead us down another path, Robin. But there's another piece that can potentially be utilized to pull in Portry, and that is Black Lotus. Now, what the heck is Black Lotus? Black Lotus is a UEFI boot kit. What is a UEFI boot kit? You want to give this one a shot, Robin? Let's start. What's UEFI?
I forget what it stands for, but I remember staring at many old flashing UEFI bootloaders and GPT bootloaders and thinking, God dang it, why can't I get this OS to install? A runtime bootloader, effectively. Compromising your device before your OS even gets started.
You nailed it. Yes, perfect. Most people would think of it in an old term called BIOS, right? So it's that part when you first boot up a computer that is responsible for, well, not only making sure everything is up and running from a hardware perspective, but that's the piece that then kicks off the operating system loader. So if I can compromise before I ever get to the operating system level, then I can potentially either load this malicious driver, or heck, I might even just short circuit the entire thing and boot it in a mode where that endpoint protection never comes up. And where this comes to play, now I'm going to use a term here that's not my term. I didn't create this, but where this comes to play, for example, is in something known as an evil maid attack. Now, if you're not familiar with an evil maid attack, normally when I say that, when I'm talking to folks, they think, what on earth are you talking about? So the easiest way to give the example is how it got its namesake. If you've ever stayed in a hotel room, right? You're traveling for business, you're traveling for pleasure, and you bring along your laptop and you utilize your laptop, but it's time to go out and see the sights. Most people will simply, hopefully, shut off their laptop and leave it on the desk, close it up, right? Because that way nobody can log into it. The evil maid attack gets its name because threat actors will literally give malicious USB sticks to the housekeeping staff and pay them to plug the USB stick into the computer and power it on, wait until it does its magic, and then power it back off. No kidding. Right. So Black Lotus is one of those things that can actually do that, and multiple ways that you can load that up. So beware the leaving the laptop on the table. That's potentially dangerous. But again, these are methods that Scattered Spider is using to get that kind of kernel level access to drop the processes. I did have opportunity to hear a system engineer for a particular endpoint protection solution, and we got into it was a pretty good discussion over some adult beverages. And I said, how does your solution protect against threat actors whose first order of business when they compromise the endpoint is to drop your product, right? To literally kill off your product? And his response to me was, they can't do that. They don't do that. Are you a gambling man? Would you like to go to Las Vegas, right? And would you like to talk to the folks at MGM? Come on.
How naive.
I know it's trivial. It's almost trivial to do. Well, we have these protections and so forth. My suspicion was the individual just didn't have the depth and didn't understand that anything can be dropped like that. So endpoints are very, very mutable, shall we say.
Indeed, this is why a lot of people are moving towards thin clients. It's why Chromebooks are becoming even more popular. But even if that's compromised and you have your UEFI or your BIOS bootloader messed up, those thin terminals are still an attack surface. Instead of it just being a fully... Oh, sorry, after you.
Oh, no. I'm sorry to mean to interrupt you, Robin, but you kind of... I love what you said just now, because the next step in the process is to establish persistence. And one of the ways that Scattered Spider establishes persistence is, you talked about desktops, but they'll utilize a virtual desktop infrastructure. So you talk about thin clients, you talk about that being protection. They know that too. So they will potentially, if they get in and they find that we're in a thin client scenario, they will go after the virtual desktop infrastructure and establish a malicious virtual desktop, which again, if we're setting up defense in depth for an organization, we're going to figure, well, our virtual desktops, those are okay. You can let those do what they want to do. So you're right. And the threat actors know it too. Right.
Yeah. For most people aren't aware, Windows has a built-in sandbox. So any Windows device, you can go into your add and remove programs feature and just enable sandboxing. So you don't have to install VMware or any of the other virtualization platforms. Windows comes with sandboxing and virtual machines included.
That's right. That's dangerous. It is. But, going back to that establishing persistence. So again, we've got the initial access taken care of, and now we're going to try to establish persistence. And there's a reason we want to establish persistence. The first one and the most obvious is that, I don't feel like working for 72 hours straight in order to compromise, right? I might want to be able to disconnect and come back. In fact, it's wise to do that, because if you have this long-term connection, as a threat actor, you risking exposing yourself, right? And nobody wants threat actors exposing themselves. But there we are, right? Let's establish that persistence. And the way that Scattered Spider is doing it, in addition to what we talked about, setting up virtual desktops that are compromised, they'll use normally acceptable remote access pieces of software like TeamViewer or Log Me In, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are legitimate. Typically, if an organization uses those, you're going to see that as approved traffic on a firewall, right, or a secure web gateway. You're going to see that as legit. So even if somebody's watching out, what they're going to see is, oh, it's just TeamViewer. We would expect that. Everything's fine. So that's the way to utilize legitimate utilities in order to establish that persistence. I know it's very sexy to talk about rootkits and all those good things, but again, I mean, why reinvent the wheel? If you're able to get an account in TeamViewer, and I know I keep picking on TeamViewer, the reason I keep talking about it is not because TeamViewer is necessarily vulnerable, but the fact is, when we look at the threats that we are monitoring as an organization, TeamViewer generates a lot of traffic, a lot of flows. So it's a big one, and it could be used.
That makes sense, because it's never good to talk positive about other vendors, but the user experience in TeamViewer is so easy. Lightweight exe, here's a 9-digit character, a string you type in, whoosh, you have access.
That's
All
right.
you need to do is go onto YouTube and look for like scammer payback videos and just see like people recording them, like contacting call centers, downloading the file, watching what they do. TeamViewer is great, but then with that simplicity comes this level of risk, especially if you have that implicit trust with who you're dealing with.
It goes back to trust again. So I've now established my persistence, which means I can come back. Now, why establish persistence? Well, I've still got more tasks to complete. So far, all I've done is manage to add myself as a trusted user, even though I'm a threat actor. But my next step is, I mean, your laptop, for example, might have some good stuff on it, but I want the really good stuff, right? Because chances are I'm not going to extort you, Robin, for $15 million. I know you only have 13.5 million. So yeah, I mean, it's not worth the effort.
I'm working on it, Bill. We'll get there one day. We'll get there.
Yeah, I get you. But I'm going to want to do lateral movement, right? This is kind of the normal progression of events, which means I'm going to try to branch from your system out into other systems. And there's a few ways I can do that. I may want to escalate my privileges. And a lot of times I can do that by checking to see if maybe you're a member of a domain admin group, or, I can dump credentials out pretty quickly from something like a Mimikatz or any number of ways, right? But I want to start slowly moving through the environment. And Scattered Spider is known to be good not only at moving laterally through kind of what we might call an on-prem infrastructure, but they're really good at Azure. We've actually observed them. They're very good at traversing Azure. So they've got the skill set there, right, to be able to move laterally even through the cloud. And what am I moving laterally for? A couple things, right? Number one, I'm looking for the valuable data. Number two, I'm looking for potentially additional credentials, right? I'm trying to open up as many ways in as I can. And I'm going to see if you can make a guess. What do you think the tool is that Scattered Spider uses to actually do that lateral movement?
Is it a simple robocopy or SCP?
Well, they certainly could do that, and that is very much a living off the land approach, right? Using some of those commands, but their big one is simply RDP, right? They simply use remote desktop, right?
So far, everything about the Scattered Spider attack seems very basic. Like nothing here is really complex or technical. It just seems like anybody with the intent and a little bit of research time can achieve this, which is kind of scary. Hopefully there's more technical stuff coming in the future. If not, then MGM and other resorts Well, there's some employee education required. But anyway,
Uh, boy.
let's continue on.
Yeah, well said. No, and there's rationale behind this, Robin, as you already understand. I want to use remote desktop because that's probably an approved application in the environment. So this is, as a threat actor, I'm keeping my evil intent secure by simple obscurity. Hey, I'm just using remote desktop, right? RDP, that protocol, usually accepted. So that is the one that they tend to use to move laterally. But as you said, there's other ways that they can do that, right? You can use WMI. There's any number of ways. This is simply what we've observed that Scattered Spider uses. Now, I've got my credentials. I've established persistence. I've started moving laterally through the environment, and I have found the good stuff, the good stuff, right? The things that I want to begin to operate on. And this is where ransomware comes in, because again, ransomware is typically used for financial purposes. And in our case, we have a double extortion. So single extortion, when it comes to ransomware, is I've encrypted your files, give me money and I'll give you the key. That's single extortion. Then there's double extortion. Number one, give me the money and I'll give you the key. But the second part of the extortion is if you don't give me the money, I'm going to expose your data on the web. That's the double. And there's actually a triple. And I think we've talked about this, but the triple extortion is now I go to your end users or your customers whose data has been compromised and say, look, they're not paying the ransom. We're going to expose the data, but if you send us $100, we won't expose yours. That's the triple extortion. Typically, we're looking at a double extortion with Scattered Spider. Now, Scattered Spider so far has really served as sort of that initial access organization, right? And that lateral movement. I found my good stuff. Now we want to do ransomware. And this is where we made allusion to this at the outset. Actually, Scattered Spider is an associate of BlackCat. Now, what is BlackCat? Who is BlackCat? BlackCat is well known as a ransomware as a service provider. They make the ransomware. So at this point, Scattered Spider pulls in BlackCat ransomware. Now, we'll talk a little bit further about that whole process of them pulling it in. But what is BlackCat ransomware? Well, first of all, it's written in Rust. If you're not familiar with Rust, Rust is a cross-platform, let's call it a programming language for lack of a better term, which means it runs just about everywhere. Now, in order for this ransomware written in Rust to run, you have to have what is called a token. It's actually a 32-bit token. What on earth? What is a token? Why would you need a token in order to run ransomware? You have any idea, Robin?
Why do you need keys to start a car?
Right.
Pretty much same question. You want to be in control of what happens. It's all about the power.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and actually the way BlackCat does it is if you become an associate of theirs and they're going to supply you with the ransomware that you want to use, you have to quote unquote buy a token. This is how BlackCat makes their money. And typically the way you buy that, it's not like you swipe a credit card for them. You may negotiate. If I'm a threat actor like Scattered Spider, I may negotiate with BlackCat and say, we will give you 15% of the ransom that we extort if we can use your ransomware. And BlackCat will say, yes, we have an agreement. Here you go. And here's your token. Now you can actually run the software.
This is a model that everybody knows, Bill. Scattered Spider, they're a managed service provider.
Right.
BlackCat, they are your vendor. Effectively,
right.
You have a vendor-partner relationship with approved discounts and rev rec, and all deals have to be booked accordingly. This is just the world of regular business, but with a shadier hat, maybe a darker shade of black.
Yeah, it's true. And there's even an advertising budget because BlackCat, also they're also known as ALPHV, actually advertised that, hey, we were the ones that worked with Scattered Spider to do MGM and Caesars Entertainment, right? So you're very right about this, Robin. This is something that we know. And as far as the mechanism of BlackCat, now we're going to start getting a pretty technical here. So just a warning for the users, and I'm probably even going to share some screens out here momentarily, Robin, just to kind of talk about it. But here's sort of how it works. So BlackCat also attempts to do some privilege escalation by doing some UAC bypass on COM interfaces. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's unpack that. First of all, what is UAC? Look, if you work on the Windows platform and you've ever tried to execute something and it says, hey, this is attempting to do such and such, are you okay with that? And you have to hit approve. That's UAC, right? That's user account control. That is a mechanism that Microsoft put in place in the Windows platform to avoid threat actors being able to automatically do things with privilege, even though we've seen that there's ways that can be bypassed as well. So BlackCat actually tries to get around that, because we're going to start working much higher in the operating system stack at this point. So they'll use a COM interface, a communications interface that is unprotected, that typically has privileged level of access, and they will use that to bypass that window popping up on the system so that there's a threat actor in there, right? Hey, I'm about to do encryption of your files. Do you accept? You don't want that window coming up, right? I'm being facetious, but so that's the first thing that they'll do, is they'll bypass user account control, call it privilege escalation. Mm-hmm. Then on the disks themselves, and you get what I mean by disks. I don't care if it's spinning rust or it's SSDs or whatever it is. But in the operating system within Windows, they have this concept of volume shadow copies. So these are essentially hidden little pointers that literally you can roll back your file system if something bad happens. Why? Why would they want to delete those? Why would they want to delete file system rollback, Robin?
Well, if you delete the rollback, then it's easy to undo all of the nasty work. Why should I pay your ransom when I can just lose 2 weeks of work and still have business as usual?
And just roll back. Yeah, that's exactly right. So they're going to want to delete those because they don't want you. And if you're super conservative and you take those snapshots every day, you've only lost a day's worth of work. You're certainly not going to pay this massive ransom for that. You're going to chalk it up as a loss and move on. And BlackCat doesn't want that to happen. So first they delete all those copies. And then, of course, they're going to try to tamper with event logs and do some event stomping and so forth. But here's where the fun stuff starts, where we're going to start encrypting. So BlackCat uses AES, right? The Advanced Encryption Standard. They use AES 128. So analysis of the malware shows that they generate a random symmetric key. Boy, we could do a whole program on symmetric versus asymmetric keys, right?
Ooh, that might be fun. Oh.
Yeah, right. So they generate the key with AES, and AES and symmetric key encryption. It's very fast, right? So once they generate their encryption key, they begin the encryption process, and then that encryption key, they will actually exfiltrate that to one of their command and control servers using their public RSA key. That's an asymmetric key. So they generate the key, they start the encryption process, and they exfiltrate the key. Why do they exfiltrate the key? Well, they don't want to leave the key on the system. If they leave the key on the system, then you can decrypt your files, right? Symmetric key encryption means the key used to encrypt can also decrypt, versus asymmetric, which is a key pair. One key is used to encrypt, the other key is used to decrypt, and the two cannot be derived necessarily from each other. So they will exfiltrate that. And, Robin, they're smart about it, because when they exfiltrate that to their command and control server, they have a tendency to hard code the IP address. Why is that smart?
You can just kill that IP address, you can remove that IP address, or you have that authentication control. If things are hard coded, it's easier to work with it, work around it, and also hide if needs be.
Yeah, it's true. Well, when we even think about the defense in depth solution that we try to bring to the market, DNS reputation is a very important control, right? And if we do a DNS query out to our command and control server, and it's, low reputation, or it's been created in the last 14 days, it's going to get intercepted. It's going to get sinkholed, and now I can't get the data out of the environment. If I hard code my IP address, no DNS necessary. I just don't need it, right? There's no need, no reputation checks, none of that. So they will do that. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Bill. I saw a very exciting piece of malware out in the field last week where somebody had a dynamic IP address. It was a regular website as a command and control server. And that had a good popularity. It was categorized in Bright Cloud or Web Roots Bright Cloud as business, and everything was good. However, behind that initial DNS was a squid proxy leading to legitimate and illegitimate services.
That's right.
So just saying that even though we're blocking all the bad stuff, there's still a chance people might be hiding in plain sight. So sorry, Bill, interrupted you. It was just popped to the top of my mind there.
It's such a great point, and we're going to talk more about that when we get to kind of the MITRE footprint of Scattered Spider, right? There you can mitigate, but this is a race. This is always a race, right? It's whether you want to call it good guys versus bad guys, whether you want to call it corporations against threat actors or nation state actors, it is constantly a race. So, they're really, and I think about this in terms of what we might refer to as a legacy appliance model. Even in a legacy appliance model where you've literally got hardware sitting somewhere that's trying to protect you, you have to go through the constant work of updating. Listen, you have to do that with endpoints, with laptops, with desktops, where you're constantly patching. This is a race. We're constantly going back and forth on this all the time. So yeah, you're right. I mean, there are ways that, threat actors, they get smarter and smarter. Really what we're trying to get to, at least initially, is eliminate the 80% of the easy stuff, the easy attacks, right? The script kiddies or the stuff that's commodity on the market. But that's very important in part of this conversation, because if we get back to what Scattered Spider is doing, so they're encrypting, they're exfiltrating data for the second part of the double extortion, right? They're exfiltrating so they can potentially broadcast it. And then, of course, they create a file that they then set as the wallpaper, right, on the system, so that a wallpaper pops up and says, hey, your stuff has been encrypted. Here's the Tor, you have to get a Tor browser, and you're going to communicate this way, and our demands, and, so on and so forth, establish that communication with the victim. So we've kind of essentially gone all the way through, if you want to use the Lockheed Martin kill chain, which great two-dimensional keychain or kill chain. We've gone all the way to actions on objectives, right? We're all the way over there, and game over, literally, right? Slot machine over, or whatever the case may be. We're at game over. So this raises a few questions, and these have been asked of me multiple times when it comes to ransomware. And Robin, I'm going to share my screen out here in a second with you, because I kind of want to show you the flaw in this thinking. So the thing about ransomware is it's kind of a piece of software. And so I get asked things like, why can't we detect the signature of this software as the threat actor is bringing it in? Man, I've got firewalls, I've got intrusion prevention engines, I've got anti-malware. How come I can't detect a signature, right? Like the ransom note. The ransom note should be the same. Or a lot of times they'll in the malware, they'll put the stolen credentials in there, or certain malware, when it does its encryption, right? So when the malware is actually encrypting the file system, it'll skip certain file extensions because it doesn't want to make the system unstable and crash it by encrypting important files. So why can't we detect that signature when that malware is inbound? And the answer to that is we have to understand what a signature is. A signature is nothing more than a hash. Mm-hmm. And what is a hash? So I have people ask me all the time, and in fact, I've kind of made folks stumble a little bit on this, where I'll ask them what type of encryption is hashing. And they go, oh, is it symmetric or is it asymmetric? Well, that's a trick question. Hashing is not encryption. It's not. Hashing is a mathematic function that actually results in information being lost, right? You're creating a fingerprint of some plain text, right? But what you're doing is you're diffusing the data, diffusing, not defusing. It's there's data diffusion here. It's a digest. You're using a mathematical formula to basically break it down into a fingerprint. Now, here's the interesting thing about hashing, and this is how signatures are built. If I change so much as 1 byte of my file, right, my ransomware malware, the hash changes dramatically. That's what hashes are supposed to do. That's what data diffusion is supposed to do. So that if so much as 1 byte changes, the hash utterly changes. We use this to guarantee integrity in things like email messages or validating that the person who sent it is the one that actually sent it. So hashing is not encryption. Hashing is fingerprinting. If I, as BlackCat, change 1 bit in my malware, I've just blown your signatures right out of the water. I'm going to show you an example, Robin. This is where I want to share the screen. Let's actually look at this in action. If you'll give me just a moment. So
this is where you finally show that you're part of BlackCat yourself.
That's funny. That's funny. So what I've shared on my screen, I've got a Windows 11 running here in a virtual machine because I want to be safe. And you can see that I've got 2 files. I've got a file called hello, and I've got a file called erase. You can see that they're actually the same size. Okay. If I execute hello, it basically says hello world, and I can press enter to quit. All right. If I execute erase, I'm erasing your drive. Just kidding, right? Hit enter to continue. Now, obviously very different files, even though they're the same size, right? They're executing different code. Interestingly, if I drop out here and I'm going to execute a diff command. So there's my erase. So this is a command that says, are these files different? And of course they're binary files, but you can see that diff says, yeah, these files are absolutely different. However, if I want to generate a hash, and I'm just going to use MD5 because it's, well, MD5 is weak anyway, but MD5 is very quick. It's an older one. You can see my fingerprint that gets generated. You can see the last digits here, right? If I do the same thing, if I do an MD5 on hello, which we know is a different file, do you notice that the hashes are the same? So this is what's referred to as a hash collision, meaning I've got 2 different files with different makeup, but the signature is the same. That's the other problem. Hashes can collide, which may lead me to a false positive. So changing 1 bit changes things dramatically, can lead to a false negative, but collisions can lead to a false positive. What's my point? What am I getting at? Well, my point is, if you are relying on signatures, BlackCat knows that. They actually know that. So what they do is they will, not only will they change the contents of the malware, but the malware itself gets encrypted before they bring it into your environment. Now, once they bring it into your environment, they don't decrypt the entire thing all at once. They do what's called progressive decryption. They decrypt individual portions of the functionality so that any of your engines that are running, hopefully they're able to dodge those engines. And it can be very, very effective. How on earth do you prevent something like this? Well, obviously, MGM had a hard time. In MGM's case, they, at least to date, didn't pay the ransomware. And by the way, when we're talking about MGM or we're talking about Caesars, keep in mind that law enforcement is currently engaged in their investigating. So a lot of these things could, information could come forth soon, right? That changes the conversation, so to speak.
Indeed. We're
But
just using those as an example.
they're
Not
examples.
authoritative. This could happen to any organization, company, or individual. So
100%.
hopefully that keep the lawyers happy. Just in case.
Exactly. But you're 100% right, Robin, on that. And so, keep in mind that simply looking at signatures of a file coming in, number one, it's so easy to change the signature. Number two, the file is going to come in encrypted anyway, right? And any key could be used to do that encryption, and then they will progressively decrypt just to try to stay even quieter. So what's to do? What do you do? Well, the key here is really elevating that security conversation, not only by using defense in depth. So, one example, and we've talked about this on prior episodes, folks will say, hey, can't I, if I have endpoint protection, I don't need next generation anti-malware in a SASE solution sitting on a point of presence. Well, I beg to differ, right? If I'm able to drop your malware, your anti-malware on your endpoint, and there is no other anti-malware in the environment, I'm like a kid in a candy store as a threat actor, right? Okay, cool, got him, right? Now I just do my lateral movement completely unchecked. Now you really want to have that anti-malware also at the point of presence. The converse holds true too. Oh, if I do always on with my end users, and I know that they actually have to connect to a point of presence that has anti-malware, then I don't need endpoint, do I? Well, no, I think you still need endpoint, because especially if you do ad hoc, but even with always on, there are ways that I can get around that too, like plugging in that USB stick and compromising the bootloader, right? Now I can stop your always on from coming on, right? If you don't lock your laptop in a safe when you're in the hotel room, right? So just examples why that defense in depth is really necessary. But really, Robin, to kind of wrap this up, how can I make sure that a threat actor like Scattered Spider is not able to compromise? And you've already said it, Robin. Step one, educate your users. You have got to educate your users. So what are we educating users on? Well, essentially what we're educating users on is how to identify potentially malicious behavior. That's really what we're doing, right? If my two-factor authenticator is pinging, that's probably bad behavior.
It's
right?
A literal alarm on your phone. That's all it is.
That's right. That's right. But you need to understand that. You need to understand that that's behavior. One of the big compromises I see happening right now for smishing is, hey, your package is held up. Click here for the postal system so that we can get details because your address is wrong, and you click on it and you log, oh, boom, they got your credentials, right? That's happening a lot right now. Educate your users on these behaviors. But when we talk about behaviors, I'm going to share my screen one more time, Robin, with you. I want to talk about this. This is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. You know that I love it. People have called me a MITRE fanboy, Robin. But the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I think, is beautiful for so many reasons. The MITRE ATT&CK framework isn't going to keep your system safe at night. Let's keep that in mind. You don't install MITRE. You don't have a MITRE product, right? The MITRE ATT&CK framework is a framework that begins to look at things from a behavioral perspective. It is a framework that provides data sources that you can investigate for potential compromise. It is a framework that gives mitigation techniques. It is a framework based upon real-world observations. In this case, in this MITRE mapping that I have on the Attack Navigator, and by the way, this is free for anybody to use, right? The MITRE ATT&CK Navigator, you simply go out to the website and you can use it. All of these items that you see colored in, these are behaviors that Scattered Spider uses, okay? And you can almost think of it like the Lockheed Martin kill chain. You start from the left and you progressively work your way through each of the steps. Here's the lateral movement step. Here's where it's collecting information, right? You can see where they do the data exfiltration. You can see where they actually impact the environment. So based on known behaviors, this is how we see Scattered Spider work, even from the very start, where you see multiples in here of how they're collecting information from users, right? Whether it's pulling stuff from browsers, redirecting them to sites, and so forth. Now, you'll notice that there's green and there's yellow. So the reason that there's a color difference is that the solution that you and I are so fond of, that we bring to the marketplace. Now, I'm not trying to turn this into a commercial, but these are areas where our solution mitigates those things. And you can see it's not all of them, right? There are some pieces that we are not able to directly mitigate. But what I'm always looking for on the MITRE ATT&CK framework is, can I disrupt an entire column? If I can disrupt an entire column, I've stopped you, right? You may use this technique and it fails, and this technique and it fails, but all of this one suddenly works, right? This is, as you can see, this is the supply chain. Remember, we talked about that driver that's signed. That's a vulnerability that happens on that particular endpoint that is at the kernel level that, maybe we're not able to mitigate it. But as we go down the kill chain, look at persistence. Persistence is completely disrupted. This is where the MITRE framework is very valuable, where I can identify those potential choke points to stop them. You also notice that privilege escalation, we're able to stop cold. We're way left on the chain here before we've ever gotten into, for example, lateral movement, which we can potentially stop, right? The entire column. Here's the point. MITRE ATT&CK framework is very useful in this case of understanding how scattered Spider works, because it's giving you the opportunity and the knowledge base that says, here are the choke points. Even if we weren't talking about the solution that you and I, it's so near and dear to us, I can still use the MITRE ATT&CK framework, because it will say, monitor these data sources. And if you notice that it's happening in these data sources, here are the mitigation techniques. Problem is, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, Robin. You're going to kind of want to time it. So I share that information because I think it's very important to start looking at things from a MITRE ATT&CK perspective. It's not the end all be all, but it gives you real world intelligence where you can not only potentially mitigate, but now you can do things like adversary emulation. You can practice in your environment, because when the attackers come, and they'll come, incident response is critical. You have to know how to react in a way that is effective and efficient, right? That stops that attack. When you have the opportunity to do a SOC assessment, right? If you happen to have a security operations center and you do an assessment, you begin to identify areas for improvement in your incident response. When you can do adversary emulation, you can check your security posture. You can check the solution, or if you're unfortunate, the solutions, multiple, that you have to manage from a security perspective. The MITRE ATT&CK framework gives you the ability to do that. So, boy, what a tour into scattered Spider. It worked, right? They were effective. They compromised users, and for 10 days, MGM was down. In the case of Caesars, they paid the ransom. And look, we've talked about paying the ransom. You remember Uncle Bill's 6 E's. We might say, don't pay the ransom because you don't know for sure that they're going to act in good faith. Well, you know what? The threat actors are smart to that too. They're starting to say, we will act in good faith, because they know that they're not going to make any money if they don't act in good faith. So they're being just as intelligent about it too, Robin.
At the end of the day, it's business, and customer satisfaction, customer service, and respect matters. Whether that be BlackCat promoting the good work they're doing, like outbound marketing, or having people like Scattered Spider providing a positive customer experience to increase those retention, renew, and upsell rates. At the end of the day, business is business, and it all depends on the ethics of the individual and the perception of what you were saying. Just like Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. And that's exactly the same that is happening out there in the cyber security landscape. People are seeing it as defense and attacks, but in reality, it's just a constant evolving war. And just like the military out there, you need to constantly practice, you need to constantly simulate, and you need to constantly prepare. Because one day, it won't be a drill, it will be a reality. And if you're not ready to tackle that, well, you're going to be in a very, very poor situation.
Yeah, Robin, I want to kind of end my comments in the human and social aspect of this.
Mhm.
Scattered Spider in particular, and their, the affiliate agreement with ALPHV has said that the reason they did, then they spoke specifically about MGM, that the reason they did this is that they felt that MGM Resorts treats their customers poorly in the whole lodging experience, and they felt that MGM made, and these are allegations, but that MGM had some shady practices concerning shares in the stock market and investing and so forth. So they feel justified in doing what they're doing. This is kind of the Robin Hood syndrome here, right? We're going to rob from the rich, but we're going to keep it. but they're making a point, and we need to realize that. Look, we understand that we're just trying to do business. That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to do business, and companies that mine for lithium to make those beautiful long living batteries that work in your laptop that enable you to conduct business, to them, that's a good that they're doing, and they're bringing solutions to the market. And yet, somebody with a deep concern over the environment may see that as literally stripping the planet of its resources and causing irreparable harm and damage to innocent people, to innocent creatures, and so forth. And so they feel socially compelled to do something about that. So you're absolutely right. We have to think of this in human, psychological, behavioral terms. This isn't just bits and bytes. And so the race, as you say, will continue. And we need to, as people in this industry of cybersecurity, we need to keep that in mind, and we need to practice that way. I think that's very important. So I love what you said.
Well, the race is on, and I think we're kind of over time today, Bill. But
We
thank
are.
you for that deep dive. It was very much appreciated. And I've come away thinking I'm not going to leave my laptop unsecured in hotel rooms, and I'm also not going to trust the safe in hotel rooms either. I think I'll just keep that device firmly attached to my body. So,
Good plan.
thank you, Bill. Until next time, you stay safe out there.
Take care, Robin.